We're so glad that you're here for our webinar. We're going to get started in a little bit. We're going to wait for more people to come into our webinar, but we're very excited about it today. So glad that you can be here. Again, so glad to see so many people coming in for this webinar. We're really excited about it today. We've got an amazing panelists and facilitators. We're going to be starting in just a little bit. So glad that people are coming in for our webinar. We're going to be starting in just a little bit. We want to make sure that everybody's here and has a chance to learn from our incredible panelists and facilitators. Again, welcome everybody. We're going to start in just a little bit with our webinar.
Hello?
Justin, thank you so much for being here.
No worries.
Sorry for some of the challenges.
No worries, no worries.
All right, wonderful. We're so glad you're here. So I want to welcome everybody. We're going to start in just a couple of minutes. We're kind of waiting for people to continue to join. So glad that everybody's here. I think we'll wait for one more minute to make sure everybody's in with the webinar. We're so excited to hear from our panelists. We've got great facilitators today from NASB Leadership. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar, Black Engineering Students Leading and Succeeding, Excelling Academically and Succeeding Professionally. It's part of our virtual professional development and mentoring summer 2020 webinar series. Quickly, my name is Frances McBride and I'm part of the team for the Center for Engineering Career Development. A very quick shout out also to colleagues and collaborators, Reggie Leonard, Heather Palmer, Dana Quist, and Sarah Mullen for working on this webinar as well. Before I introduce our facilitators, just a few housekeeping things. I want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and that we will follow up with you after this webinar with what has been shared and also any resources as well. And that we do encourage you to write in your Q&A, have your questions through Q&A. We will be addressing those at the end of the webinar. I want to let you know that this event is being co-sponsored by the UVA chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers, and it's being facilitated by the president, who is Naja Tyree, and she's also a fourth-year aerospace engineer. In addition to Naja, Nathaniel Donko Moore is also going to be facilitating. He was the president last year. He's president emeritus this year. He's also a fourth-year and systems engineer. And thank you also so much for our panelists, Shavonne, Lee, Les, Morgan, Justin, for being here as well. Naja and Nate, I'm going to have you take it away.
All right. Thank you, Francis, and thank you all for coming here today. My name is Nathaniel. I go by Nate often, as Francis said, and I am a rising fourth year systems engineering. I always say it's the best engineering at UVA and the best major at UVA. So if you've not already chosen a major, please consider systems engineering. But I'll turn it over to Naja to introduce herself.
Oh, Naja, you're on mute.
Hi, sorry, I was having some internet problems. But hi, my name is Naja. I'm a fourth year aerospace engineering student from Atlanta, Georgia. And yes, I'm the president of the National Society of Black Engineers at UVA, and I'm really excited to be here with you guys today.
All right, so once again, to the panels and everyone, thank you. We would like to start by asking the panelists to introduce themselves, share one important, introduce yourself, your name, one important takeaway from your UVA education, and basically what you do now and why you are on this panel, or why you decided to agree to be on this panel. So let's start with Les, since Les is the first person on my video.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nate Dogg. It's so good to see everybody today and hear from everybody today. It's like the Brady Bunch. When we do so many Zoom calls, it's either Hollywood Squares or the Brady Bunch. I can't decide which one that this looks like. Les Williams, class of 2000, mechanical engineer. It used to be the most popular major back in the days, but now everything is computerized. So I guess it's like computer science, or like Nate was saying, systems engineers. Right now, I am co-founder of Risk Cooperative. We are a full-service insurance brokerage firm. We do all lines of insurance, from employee benefits all the way to unique risks like cyber risks. So you're going to hear me talk about that quite a bit today, because this is based on engineering and UVA engineering. Really enjoy what we're doing. We've been in business 5.5 years. I'm extremely active with UVA. I'm a trustee of the Engineering Foundation, the VEF, Virginia Engineering Foundation, along with Justin Dean, who you'll hear from soon. I'm also a trustee with the Board of Managers at the Alumni Association at UVA. So I'm at UVA a lot these days, probably 5 or 6 times a year. The big takeaway of my experience 4 years at UVA, this may surprise a lot of people, but having fun and enjoying what you are doing with other people. My wife went to UVA too. She graduated in 2000. She does not have near the same level of friends that I do from the engineering days. We are a small professional school, much smaller than the college. And I keep in touch with a ton of engineers, not only Justin, who lives not too far from me here in Metro DC, but engineers that are older than me and also younger than me. We went through blood, sweat, and tears for 4 years. It's still the hardest thing I've done in my life. Engineering was harder than my MBA program. I also attended Harvard Business School. But you really build kinship and friendship with people, and it teaches you how to work together. And I use it every single day, and we'll go into that a little bit later in detail. The reason why I chose to be on this panel is because I'm very supportive of UVA. I've spoken many times at the school. I was also a peer advisor for 3 years at UVA. We need more people that look like us talking to the younger generation to let you know what pitfalls to avoid and what you need to do to be successful in any career you choose after graduation. So very happy to be on this panel, and thank you for the invitation, Nate.
My pleasure. All right. Morgan, you want to go next?
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Good morning for me, but afternoon, I guess, for you all. My name is Morgan Lataillade. I graduated in 2017, so not too long ago, from biomedical engineering at UVA. I also had a minor in studio art, so just fun fact about me. I also was a former NSBE UVA chapter president, so shout out to you all for all the work that you're doing and organizing something like this. This is really awesome. As far as what I'm currently doing, I currently work at Genentech, so it's a biotechnology company based in South San Francisco. So I currently live in the Bay Area in Oakland. I work as a process engineer for what we call a drug product. So essentially liquid medications that are administered in hospitals and clinics by physicians through IV and injections. There's a very highly regulated process and highly engineered process in order to get it actually into the vials that they come in. So that's essentially what I help to optimize and troubleshoot every day. So I have a lot of fun doing it. It's a lot of problem solving, a lot of hands-on work, and that's something that I really wanted at this stage in my career. So I really do enjoy it. I'm also currently working towards my master's in biotechnology, enterprise, and entrepreneurship at Johns Hopkins. It's a fully online program. So if anyone has questions about just, online learning, which I'm sure you guys are quite familiar with just with the current state of things with COVID, but pretty well versed in that as well. But one thing that I learned at UVA, and one really important takeaway for me, is the importance of putting yourself out there, the importance of marketing yourself, and the importance of mentorship, kind of all of that collectively. I would say that all three of those things are the reason that I have my current role. It's the reason that I got to Genentech and made this big move 3,000 miles away. It's the reason that I've developed the way that I have this far in my career, even being pretty early in my career this far. And I joined this panel and wanted to, provide the opportunity to have other people hear from me, because I see this as a similar way of mentorship. Although it's virtual, it's kind of sharing what you've learned. It's helping, the next generation and providing guidance. And I think it's really important because I benefited a lot from that up to where I am right now. And I think it's important to kind of give that back in a way. So thanks for inviting me.
All right, thank you for coming. Next we will do Miss Shavonne.
Hey, good afternoon. From Oregon, it's good morning. Shavonne Gordon, excited to be here. I am an alum of UVA, and I will own the fact that I am probably the oldest alum. So I graduated in 1995 with a degree in systems. Go systems, Nate. I probably am somewhat unique as well in that I have an engineering undergrad, but right now I actually work in HR, so I lead talent acquisition and diversity recruiting for Capital One. And it's interesting, one of the reasons I ended up in HR, similar to what Les said, is I wanted to figure out a way to hire and retain more people who look like me. And even now, in the millennium, it's 2020, Black female engineers are still a bit of a purple unicorn. And so that is still a bit of my quest, is how do I continue to provide access and exposure to our kids as early as elementary school to STEM, computer science, and engineering, just because it creates so much opportunity for them once they get to college and beyond. So that's my personal passion. Also, I'll share that I have two little girls. Well, don't tell them I said little. They're 11 and 16. And my goal is to get them through college and out of my house. They can't come back. So super excited to be here. I've always looked for opportunities to get back to UVA. I've done quite a bit of work with Francis in the Office of Career Planning, and then also used to be called the Center for Diversity Engineering at UVA, just because I know it's tough. As I think about the one or the several important things that I took away from my career experience at UVA, similar to Les, having fun. I didn't do much of that at school because there was always so much work to do at UVA, but I did stay close with those individuals who were my study group, my ride or die folks when I was at UVA. And then I would probably say resilience, right? Because for anybody who attended the Nesbianship luncheon that we had earlier this year, I shared a story around how my first semester was terrible, to the point where I wasn't even sure that I would remain a student at UVA. And so I had to be resilient in figuring out how I was going to recover from that experience, how I was going to continue to grow, and how I was going to message to potential employers around why my GPA was not as high as some of my peers. Because once you start at a low point, which I started at a pretty low point, it is very difficult to kind of get those grades back up to where you want them to be. And so I did learn to be resilient. I learned to recover from failure. I learned to problem solve and figure out how I was going to not make some of the same mistakes that I made in my first semester, so that I could graduate and be successful. So excited to be here. Looking forward to conversation with the rest of the panelists.
All right, and last but not the least, Mr. Dean, Justin.
Great. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is Justin Dean. Pleasure to be with you. Sorry I couldn't join via video. Brief introduction of myself. I'm a mechanical engineer, class of 2001, Minty and co-conspirator with Les Williams in the late 90s, early 2000s at the UVA Engineering School. I am currently the managing director and partner and run BCG, Boston Consulting Group's Washington, D.C. office, and with a focus on energy and renewables, serving energy and renewables clients. And I've been doing that for about 13 years. You know, I think the two things for me really quick that I learned from UVA are, it's just, life is about people, right? It's not always kind of what you know, it's making connections, expanding your network, and, you know, using kind of your opportunity now to get connected with people that have different backgrounds than yourself, and expanding kind of what you can learn from them. And I would say, you know, why I'm on this panel, I think I echo everything everybody else said, but I think it's actually very important to, you know, ensure that, you know, we give the lessons that we've learned in taking the path that we've taken, and share that with you all, so you don't have to kind of learn some of the hard way, the ways that we learned.
All right, thank you guys for the introductions, and thank you for coming out. So the first question that we will have for you guys today is, what does it mean to be an engineer in a non-engineering field? Like, how do you navigate that space? What led you there? If you could further expound on like how you got there and what do you do?
Okay, so I can start there, and the other panelists can pop in, because clearly I'm not in an engineering field. I will share that I did start in an engineering field. So my first job out of college was as a software engineer. I worked in manufacturing for DuPont for several years, and then went on to be a database consultant. And then my first probably 8 years at Capital One were actually in computer science and engineering. Here's what I'll share. The beauty of an engineering degree is you can do whatever you want with it, right? So it's interesting for some of our peers in the college, right? If you have a degree in philosophy, or if you have a degree in political science, it's difficult for you to take that degree and turn it into a software engineering job. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. Whereas for an engineer, you can literally do whatever you want with that degree. You may have to explain to somebody, if you're an engineer and you decide you want to go to HR, because they're going to scratch their head and say, but you're an engineer. But it's a limitless degree. And I know when I was in college, and back then when we had career fairs, you actually had a paper resume that you dropped in the box. But some of the places who were extremely interested in engineering was surprising to me. Like, there's a lot of banks, a lot of consulting firms. And the reason why is, as an engineer from UVA, you are an expert problem solver. You are extremely analytical. You're able to kind of dissect a problem top down, bottoms up. And those skills are valuable regardless of the career. So, you know, I would encourage you. Here's the thing, like for me, I did want to do like an engineering job. So coming out of college, I wanted to do computers, I wanted to do software, and I wanted to do engineering. And I would encourage you to figure out if that's a passion of yours, to actually be a quote unquote engineer. And if so, you should absolutely do that. But my advice to you is, once you've kind of scratched the itch of actually being an engineer, don't feel like you need to limit yourself to only engineering degrees, because you don't have to. You know, be prepared with your elevator speech around if you do want to do a complete career change, why. Be prepared to talk about the skills that you're bringing to the table for the person who maybe has a hard time translating why an engineer wants to do something else. But I think you'll hear from all of the panel members, right? Like, while they're probably leveraging their engineering degree, they're probably doing some things that don't necessarily fall in line solely with engineering. So that is the beauty of that degree. I'd love to, if people have questions around, if I think about Capital One, our business analysts, 56% of them have engineering degrees, right? So they're not doing traditional engineering jobs, but they are in roles that allow them to drive significant company impact. So, and obviously I'm in HR. Again, it's because my passion was, how can I find more people who look like me? And I recruit for roles across the company, including technology, analyst, HR, and there's engineers kind of across all of those roles. Any of the other panelists? I see Les.
Yeah, well, Shavonne, thanks so much for that. I actually started off in engineering too at Ford Motor Company in Detroit for 3 years. And what's interesting is and Justin touched on this earlier, I did a rotation program, and I encourage everybody if you're unsure if you want to do traditional engineering or not, try doing a rotation program. My bias is at a big company, like a Capital One, like a Ford. All my internships in school, I got through NSBE, by the way, and so I love NSBE to death. And Justin and I were big NSBE heads. We were at all the parties and leading a ruckus at all the, Region 2 hype at all the different NSBE events. But Merck Pharmaceuticals, GE Aircraft Engines, and GE Appliances, I got my jobs because directly of NSBE. And when I graduated, I went to Ford because I said, I want to do a rotation program that's going to show me different aspects of business, not just engineering. So my favorite job was an assembly line. I was a line foreman for 35 people, many of whom had children older than I was at the time I was 22. And I learned a lot, Justin said it, about people. We had the best cycle times and we were producing the most engines, not because I was the smartest engineer. I understood the concepts of how an engine worked, but I understood what the mindset was of a lot of my line workers, how to motivate them. There is a rift between UAW and corporate, whether you're GM or you're Ford or Chrysler. But I learned how to overcome those boundaries, talking to people, spending time, even with their kids, helping their kids with some of their math homework after hours at the plant. We were from 6 to 3 was my line, right? So there was that. There was the more technical NVH, noise, vibration, harshness aspect of my job. After a 2-year rotation program, I said, you know what? I want to go into sales and marketing at a company, because a lot of those positions at Ford, even though they were, technical in nature, like the NVH rotation, at the end of the day, if I couldn't get the lab technician to run my engine program successfully because I didn't know how to talk to him or her, I was dead in the water. There were so many people that would go up to these lab technicians, engineers from smart schools, looking down, talking to them, not even making eye contact. And the lab technicians are like, wow, I don't even understand what this person's saying to me. So communication, I think UVA does a really good job of that. And I know Shavonne knows this just because the resumes that she reads from UVA engineers versus others. We do have more of a well-rounded education. What I'm doing now, we underwrite our own cyber insurance with Lloyd's of London, so we do some really technical things. In a few hours, I have a call with a large cybersecurity firm. And when they realized that I had an engineering degree, they totally treated me differently. And they were using terms that I was familiar with just because, common engineering terms. And it gives me a leg up in what I'm doing now, because I do work with a lot of numbers when we're talking about loss ratios and insurance, and we're designing these really unique programs, which I don't have a chance to go to in this call. But you'll hear this theme throughout everybody on these panelists. You still use engineering, whether it's numbers or a mindset, you still use that in your career. And I'm using it now more than ever with some of the complex numbers we're working with on our different cyber insurance programs.
Awesome. Right. Awesome. Thank you all. Does anyone else in the panelists want to talk about the topic? All right. We'll move right next into the
Sorry,
question.
I can try to say something.
All right. Go ahead, Morgan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I guess I'm a bit different just because I don't actually work in a non-engineering field. I work right now as a formal engineer. And I think I'm in a similar phase in my career as what kind of Shavonne echoed about her early career stages, working in a more technical field, and what Les echoed about his work in a rotational program. So I actually also started in a rotational program as well, a 2-year rotational program that you do 4 6-month rotations in a number of different facets of the business. And just echoing that, one, those are really great opportunities for you to learn a lot about a really big company and really understand where you best see yourself fit. And also, I use this to kind of understand whether or not I truly wanted to do something technical, or if I, felt better, that my skills had better use in more business roles. And so I was very particular about making sure before picking an engineering role that I, evaluated all my options, and that I wasn't just picking an engineering role because I felt like I needed to based on what I studied in college, or because I felt a need to prove to myself that actually going through the 4 years of a true challenge that is engineering school actually amounted to me being a quote unquote real engineer. So although I am working as a, quote unquote formal engineer, I will say that you shouldn't limit your career scope to just engineering jobs for similar reasons that both Les and Shavonne mentioned. But one, I would say the title of engineer has a decent amount of variance in what the role actually entails across different industries and across different companies. So just because you have the title of engineer doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically going to like the work that you're doing. And two, you should really focus more on what the role requires, what you'll be doing, what you'll be learning, and if that's truly aligned with what you see for yourself at that phase in your career. And like Shavonne had mentioned, as a graduate of UVA engineering, you're really well trained in problem solving and critical thinking and being creative. You also know how to work very, very hard. And those skills will translate into every industry. It's just more so how you want to apply that. So yeah, don't limit yourself to the literal confines of what you think someone with your degree should do. The possibilities are honestly endless.
All right, thank you very much, Morgan. I just want to recognize that there are some VCU students on this call, and this next question applies to everyone. So the next question is, what does it feel like being a Black person in the corporate world? How do issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion influence your workplace? I will start with Justin for this question.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, okay, as one of the, actually, I guess one of the most senior people kind of at a 20,000 person company, a senior Black person at a 20,000 person company, you know, I've had to deal with kind of some of these issues kind of throughout my career, but even more so probably over the last couple months. And I would say, you know, there's a couple different lenses on it. One is what I tell people is, you know, you may look different, but like you should never question the reason why you are at that company. You are at your company while you are at your job. I think sometimes, you know, as kind of the only face that looks like yours, there's often a sense of, you know, sometimes self-doubt of, do I fit in? Am I doing the right thing? You know, we've done research around it, where it's, you know, as a minority person in a company, you start to question, you take mistakes that you make much harder than kind of your colleagues, when in reality, everybody's making those same type of mistakes. So I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, you know, bring your authentic self, find a place where you can bring your authentic self to work. So why this is very important is, you know, most jobs that you're going to be at are going to take 100% of your mental capacity. So if you're unable to be your authentic self and you're spending 10 to 20% of your kind of mental capacity masking who you are, trying to fit in, you know, that all of a sudden doesn't make for a recipe for success, because, you know, you're only kind of contributing 80% of your mind share to what's going to be a really difficult job. So it's really important to find that fit in a place that you can really be yourself and thrive, which will ultimately kind of produce really good outcomes. And then third, I would say is, you know, as you kind of work throughout your career, look to figure out how to make a difference. And it's not just on you, but, you know, think about how you can kind of make a difference, you know, for the next generation of folks that are coming behind you, or your colleagues there today. And do that unabashedly. You know, I work with a number of, you know, Black executives, and we sometimes joke, you know, as we've kind of gotten to be in positions of leadership and executive leadership at our companies, we sometimes get the mantra of, oh, now that you're in leadership, like, you know, it's the only way to be successful at this company is to be Black or be a woman. And, you know, just because I have a diverse leadership team, I'm perfectly fine with having somebody kind of say those things, because too often that's not the case. And it's, you know, diversity is an important thing that I value, and I will continue to kind of, you know, make that important piece of every leadership team that I'm on. So I think those are just a few things as I think about and reflect back on my experience, but would be interested to hear from the rest of the panelists as well.
So, thank you.
Yeah. Justin, I think you're spot on. The interesting thing is you may find sometimes the more senior that you get, the more lonely you feel, but there are going to be times where you're going to look around and you may be the only Black face or the only woman in the room. I would probably argue that's not different from some of the classes you're in today, right? It's still going to feel similar. Hopefully you get the opportunity to build bonds with new folks, right, in the corporate world that kind of have your back. Where it also gets interesting, honestly, is right now, it is an interesting time externally with the racial injustice and, you know, folks really pushing for how do we start to push for changes to systemic racism. And in the corporate world where you may be one of the only, you find yourself in an interesting position where you're being asked to educate your peers, right? I would probably argue that's a good problem to have, and I will say a unique problem to have, because having been in the corporate world for a long time, this is probably one of the first times where people have started to come to me and they want to learn, which gives me hope. I also think you're in a position where you can help others, as Justin said. So I'd like to say, you know, if you have cracked the glass ceiling and had an opportunity to get to a more senior level, it's kind of your job to keep that crack open so that you can bring up others along and give them opportunity to excel and succeed along with you. But I would probably argue that for each of you, you know, the corporate world, while different, will feel and look somewhat similar to what you're seeing at UVA. Typically where we see that it is a drastic change is for some of the students that we tend to hire from historically Black colleges and universities, and that's where the corporate world can be a huge change, particularly because they tend not to see as many people who look like them. But again, I'm hopeful. There's a reason I'm in this job. It is because I want to bring more of you all into a space where you can become our next generation of leaders and start to continue to push for change and more people who look like us in leadership roles that can influence and drive change.
So do any of the panelists want to speak on this topic?
I think both Shavonne and Justin covered it well. The only thing I'll add on to that is, and Shavonne, you hit this perfectly. I'm 5 blocks from the White House, and these protests have been so invigorating and inspiring. I think not only are now non-African Americans starting to listen more, but my voicemail, text messages, Zoom calls, I've been flooded with a lot of my white peers. Some of them I've spoken in 20 years, and some of them that, you know, I've recently met, and I almost am their therapist because they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they're like, why do you seem so calm about all this stuff? I said, because I've been in this skin for 42 years. And so this is nothing new to me. And they were just shocked that I go through some experiences that they never even had to think about, i.e. like if you get pulled over, what you're supposed to do and how you're supposed to say it. And many were like, wow, I thought that was I didn't know if that was true or not. And I'm so happy every time I go to the metro. Even to this day, I still see white folks with signs that say Black Lives Matters. And it's so amazing to see, young and old. And I just wave at them, and I thank them for doing that. And so now a lot more people we've kind of, like you were saying, Shavonne, the glass ceiling, and Justin, you've cracked that. There's a crack now. More people are willing to listen. Now it's not just Black folks saying it, but it's also white folks saying, and I've gotten many calls from our business partners, what email communication should I send to my clients? We don't have a CDO. How do I go about hiring one? And it's good to hear all these questions coming our way. And I think this is going to be a sustained movement, not just one moment. And unfortunately, it came off the back of a horrific video. We know that there is a lot out there, but if anything good came out of this, it's that it's now a sustained movement that's happening.
Yeah, agree, Les. And we're going to capitalize on it every way that we can.
Great, amazing. Morgan, do you want to speak on it?
Yeah, I think everyone kind of summarized it well. I guess one additional thing that I could add is a difference between feeling like an only at UVA and feeling like an only in the workplace. I think you have to kind of go out of your way and more actively seek out that sense of community. So like in school, for example, you're in some ways given the sense of community through, for example, like the peer advisor program, through OAAA, Office of African American Affairs for those that don't attend UVA. And so you kind of are given that sense of community, and people kind of go out of their way and make it their job to make sure that you feel at home and that you have that sense. At work, you don't really have that. So you kind of have to go out and seek it for yourself. And it's something that you should go into the workplace knowing that, you know, if that's what you want, you should actively go find it. So don't be afraid to reach out to people, to join there. A lot of companies have what we call employee resource groups. So it's basically like a kind of like a club, similar to NSBE, where ours is called African Americans in Biotechnology. So it's a group of African Americans who are ultimately working to promote the success of Black people in our workplace. Also doing things in the community. So it's kind of like a similar group. And for me, that's provided that sense of community really well. Also seeking out mentors. I've reached out to a lot of Black women that I admire and I look up to in leadership, just to have that sense of mentorship as well. So yeah, don't be afraid to reach out and build that sense of community for yourself.
Yeah, and maybe one thing I'll just chime in on. Sorry, I was on mute for a second, but I love Morgan what you were just saying. But I'd also like to talk through the difference for everybody, the difference between a sponsor and a mentor, which is actually something that's really important. There's a video from Carla Harris, who is African American woman, who is the vice chairman at Morgan Stanley. It's one of the best TED Talks I've seen, where she talks about the difference between a sponsor and a mentor. But a lot of times you're going to need not only mentorship at your company, but a sponsor at your company. And a sponsor is somebody sometimes, and most of the time, kind of in some of these situations, is not going to look like you. But they're going to be the person that has a seat at the table, that can influence decisions that have a positive or negative impact at key inflection points on your career. So that promotion that you're up for, this is the person that's going to be able to advocate for you and kind of get that promotion. And maybe you're not leaning on that person on a regular basis and calling them the same way you do a mentor, but it's very important to develop those sponsors, because no one in any leadership ranks at any company gets to where they are on the nature of their own merits alone. It is only by the way of, like, you know, getting help from others that look like you, that don't look like you, that people kind of achieve that success. And I think that's sometimes another fallacy, that we go in and we just say, well, I can work harder. In reality, it's, you need to work hard, you need to bring your best to work, but also you need to be able to lean on somebody to put their thumb on the scale for you, kind of at those moments that matter. And that's where sponsorship actually comes. And the Carla Harris talk does a really good job of talking about how to actually go about getting a sponsor in some of those situations.
Thank you all for those responses. And so our next question is, what was the biggest failure you've experienced, either at UVA or in the workplace? Could you expound on that and maybe talk about how you overcame it?
I got so many failures. Any successful person has a lot of failures. First of all, I will say this, and thank you, Nate, for giving a shout out to VCU. So shout out to Havoc. Shout out to Rosalind Hobson, who's an amazing professor at VCU. She's a close friend. When I was in the Bridge program in 1996, taking you back, she was one of our mentees. So I hope Rosalind either is on this Zoom call, or please give her my regards. I'll send her a note after this. One of the failures that I've had is actually coming out of business school. I was offered a job at IBM, sales and marketing. I decided to take that job versus go back to Ford Motor Company, mainly because IBM wrote the book on sales, much like Procter & Gamble wrote the book on brand product marketing. And so if I'm now launching from engineering into sales and marketing, I wanted to go to a place where I can get trained for that. Went down to Atlanta, Georgia. Made a lot of money my first year, my second year as well. It wasn't because I was the best salesman. Companies that big, what really matters the most is what territory you're given. And because I performed well in undergrad at UVA and they liked what I did at business school, they said, you're a high achiever, so we're going to kind of mark you for a position for success and growth in this company. My first year at IBM, I had so many things that went through my mind. I knew that I was more of a self-starter, and the entrepreneurship bug kind of bit me back in business school. And I didn't jump on it immediately. I said, oh, I'll get to it sometime. After I save up a certain amount of money, then I'll do it. So after my first year, made a lot of money, and then I said, okay, great. Well, let me just, after my second year, then I'm going to do it again. And so finally, after my third year, I said, you know what? If I don't make the leap now into something more entrepreneurial for me, then I'll never, find happiness. And so that's when I went to take a job at a firm called Staubach, Roger Staubach, quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys in the 70s. I was the only black person in my office, and there's probably in a firm of 1,600 people across the country, there's probably 10 of us. And there's probably 3 black professionals there that were actually doing real estate deals. I remember the first day on the job, Emmett Smith sent me an email note because his firm, Smith Cypress Partners, did real estate development and partnered with Roger Staubach. So here I am, a team of the Washington football franchise for many years, emailing with Emmett Smith, which I thought was kind of cool. I went from making money in the 6 figures to making 0. It was 100% commission. And I loved it. I did it for 4 years. After 2 years, I finally started making money. I took out credit cards to get through life, moved back in with my parents when I moved back up to DC. And even though I was not making any money at all initially, there was that drive. And I said, well, this is something I want to do longer term. And I always said, I wonder why I didn't do that even earlier. Even before business school, several of my friends in business school did their own thing, failed, and kind of repositioned themselves. So if I had to do it over again, I probably would have taken that leap even sooner, probably right before business school. So me hesitating a little bit, I view that a little bit as a failure. And again, I got a lot of different ones, but I'll let other people chime in on their failures.
Hey, I briefly touched on mine. I always chew back to this one because my learnings have applied in the corporate world as an adult, I'll say. And that was, my first semester at UVA. And one of the reasons I just failed miserably that semester is I never took advantage of the resources that were available to me. So there was tutoring, there were office hours, there were study groups. And being just new to college and new to this concept that I was no longer the smartest person in the room, it wasn't until I completely fell flat on my face and had terrible grades that my friends in E-School were like, well, we always do our chemistry homework together and we've been going to office hours. And oh, by the way, did you know that there's tutors and they're free, right? Like, it was almost like a reality check for me to check my ego and to take advantage of the network of associates who were available to me via NSB and SHIP and SWE, who all had figured out how to leverage their network to get work done and to get the help that they needed to be successful at UVA. And I learned that the hard way. But once I learned it, I was able to maximize all of those resources, and it just made my time at UVA so much better. And the same applies in the corporate world. So a little bit, we've talked about it already. I think Justin and Les mentioned it. Once you get to the corporate world, Morgan mentioned this as well, you have to rebuild that network and not be afraid to ask questions, ask for help when you need it. And figure out who your allies are, right? Who your mentors are and who your sponsors are, because you need those people to be successful in your roles. And I also share that story a lot for those of you who are still students so that you know that you can recover from that experience. Because I know what it feels like when you see those grades. For me, back in the day, it was a piece of paper when I saw those grades. And your immediate thought is, I can't do this. Right? This is too hard. It makes you question everything about yourself. And what you need to true back to is you are at UVA for a reason. You are successful, you are capable, you are resilient, and you are a leader. And so it is figuring out how you leverage all of those resources around you to ultimately be successful, and that carries on. And that will carry on throughout every phase of your career.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I've experienced failure throughout my entire career. I think my story is always one of a slower start and faster finish. So I I recently shared with my entire office of 350 people, very high achieving folks. I was like, I graduated UVA with a 2.62 GPA. And on that 2.62 GPA, the last 2 years as I got into my major, I think I had like a 3.1. So that gives you a little bit of kind of the thought of the struggles that I had my first 2 years at UVA in terms of just adapting to college and the curriculum, et cetera. But the great news is like I was able to overcome that. And the same thing when I started at BCG. I had several struggles in terms of, you know, am I here? Can I be successful here? It took me, you know, an extra 3 months beyond kind of what it typically takes, you know, the normal consultants to get promoted to project manager. But yet I was still able to kind of be successful and was, you know, the first African-American to be appointed to run an office for BCG globally. So I think that the thing I would just is encourage everybody is failure is so completely normal. You know, one of the best pieces of guidance I got was I developed a failure resume. And sometimes I share that with my mentees to just talk through all of the different times that you fail. And it's like kind of like a normal resume, except it only highlights your failures. So it helps people to get comfortable with failure because failure is learning. Right? You have to, Les is a gym rat, right? So he knows that in order to build a muscle, you have to tear that muscle down. And failure is just part of that process. So don't ever kind of get down on yourself by failing. Without failure, there would be no success.
Yeah, and I can go now. So echoing a lot of what everyone said, and I think echoing it is maybe more instilling it as well, but I think it's really important that you give yourself permission to make mistakes and put less energy into beating yourself up for it and more into how you can learn from it. Inevitably, I think that any mistake that you have has a lesson embedded into it. And that's something that even me, I'm definitely still learning and definitely still getting comfortable with. And so I guess the story that I want to share isn't necessarily my biggest failure, but it's something that's relatively recent that happened. And I think that kind of highlights how this is something that I'm definitely still working through myself and something that I'm still getting comfortable with myself. So relatively recently I had a situation at work where I was a part of a bigger mistake that kind of ended up putting a wrench in slowing down one of our manufacturing production batches. And so it was one of those things that, you know, I should have caught and I should have escalated it to prevent it from happening and preventing it from having the result that it did. But I didn't. And so ultimately I had to take some responsibility for why things didn't go according to plan, for why things didn't work the way that we expected them to. And I felt really, really bad about it to the point that it was like physically upsetting. And honestly, I think that I could have, you know, expended all of my energy just beating myself up about it, saying what I should have done. But that wasn't going to change the fact that, you know, it happened the way that it did. And so just sparing the technical details of the issue, what I ended up doing was just going and fixing it. And all of this was driven by me. I made sure that this wasn't going to happen again. And in doing this, I learned the process that I was working with, like the back of my hand. So now I know this process incredibly well. I was also able to highlight a couple of gaps in the process that we could kind of use to improve upon. So this is something that I'm actually working on now as a project. My manager and I turned this into, you know, a process improvement project. So kind of turning this into a lessons learned. So again, kind of having the understanding that mistakes are inevitable is something that, you know, I'm still working on. And I think as the culture that we have at UVA is, you know, thinking that anything less than perfect is kind of unacceptable. But mistakes are going to happen. And what matters more, in my opinion, is just how you handle them.
Great, thank you. Personally, I'm glad to know that it's okay to make mistakes because I have made a few, and it's nice to know that making mistakes is not the end of it. So this time, thank you, panelists, for all the wonderful answers to our questions. We're going to go into Q&A. Our first question from Ruwan is, Usman is, if you could expand more on how you overcame feelings of not fitting in or loneliness in your career spaces. So if any of the panelists could talk more about feeling of loneliness and how you were able to eventually fit in your career spaces.
I think both Justin and Les hit on the importance and Morgan as well of growing your network when you go into career spaces, and recognizing that sometimes your members of your network may not look like you. That gets particularly important when you're looking for mentors and sponsors as well. And the beauty of a network that doesn't look like you is they provide information that may not be obvious to you because you just have a different identity as they do. The other thing that I would mention in the career corporate space is typically there are organizations called employee resource groups. And they are typically based on affinity. So for example, there is a Black employee resource group, there is a women's employee resource group, there's a Hispanic employee resource group. And those could just be great ways for you to spend some time with people who celebrate similar things, similar cultures, similar backgrounds as you, even though that's not your normal day-to-day. It can be a safe space for you to share common experiences. That's typically also where you can go and celebrate Black History Month. I actually encourage my team to become a member of all of the business resource groups, even if they don't identify with that particular culture, because it's also just a great way to learn about other cultures. So I know for me, on those days where I just needed to see more Black people, I'm just gonna say the thing, right? I could always go to the employee resource groups as a way to do that. And what you'll find is there's subgroups that develop as a part of that. So it could be, we have an HBCU group within the employee resource group. And so if you want to go connect with people who went to HBCUs, you can do that. A lot of the larger companies and even some of the smaller ones have employee resource groups. Also recognize that your ties to organizations like NSBE doesn't have to end at the college level. NSBE also has professional chapters and local chapters as well. So where you may not be finding that connectivity at work, perhaps there's a network where you can find it outside of work as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would just add to that too is, you know, as you think about kind of senses of loneliness, it's think about the secondary ways that you can connect with people. So for example, made me successful was linking up with fellow UVA grads kind of in the Dallas office. So I think there's always something like that you can take a look at as well.
Awesome. Any of the panelists want to go? And I'll also say, if you have any questions, please post it in the Q&A, or you can post it in the chat.
I see that we did. Hi, everyone. This is Heather Palmer. I did see that we received one question from one of the attendees. What are you most optimistic about right now?
Thanks, Heather. I think I touched on this earlier. I'm extremely optimistic about the state of race relations in America and the Black Lives Matter movement, because so many people now are coming out, black, brown, purple, whatever, in support of, okay, this is a problem that's been going on for a long time. Let's address it. And what's happened with it, I think who asked that question was Gulu, my friend Gulu. He's on the board with me at UVA. When you start seeing a lot of these statues coming down in Richmond, many of these statues, as everybody knows, if you don't know, they were all built around like, you know, the 30s, right? They weren't built like in 1866, 1870 when the South lost the war. They were built in the Jim Crow era as a means to threaten African Americans, right? And you know, when all the lynchings were going on, et cetera, et cetera. So I was so happy that this one incident caught on video has raised the attention to this pandemic. We talk about COVID-19 or this other pandemic, but now things are happening. Washington's changing the name of their football team. We're looking at the statues coming down. globally. I learned a lot about King Leopold. If you guys have not heard about that, take a look at it. Google it. King Leopold. I believe it was in Belgium, if I'm not mistaken. Did horrific things in the Congo. He was a conquest. You know, basically killing millions of Africans over a number of years. Some of those statues are coming down now. So this has rippled across around the globe. And I'm really optimistic because I think it's going to be a movement, and it's translating into a lot of the young Black engineers on this call. When you go into amazing companies like Capital One, the pathway will be a little bit easier for you to get recognized in things that, you know, Shavonne, myself, Justin, that we had to go through early in our careers. Some of those barriers are being broken down. So I'm extremely optimistic.
I agree, and thank you. If we could possibly get to the one last question. Chanel Williams asks, well, she says, as a third-year transfer student, I'm anxious about balancing establishing relationships and academics without being overwhelmed. What tips do you have for making impactful connections while being unfamiliar with UVA culture and work ethic?
Hey, Chanel, I can answer this question. I think one way is just finding commonalities with people. Like a lot of people have said, learning that people and relationships are really important is one thing that a lot of us have learned while we were at UVA, and finding that common ground, whether it's, you know, being in NSBE, being a woman, having similar interests, can kind of break down maybe some of the barriers that you have in trying to build that connection with someone. So I would say that's definitely the first thing. And also, I know it's a lot easier said than done, but just not being afraid to put yourself out there, not having, you know, any feelings of imposter syndrome, recognizing that you are there for a reason, I think can kind of help to break down the barriers as well. And it's also just an active exercise that you kind of just have to practice and get more comfortable with over time. It's not something that, I guess, the comfortability aspect isn't going to happen overnight. But the more that you practice it, the more that you put yourself out there, the easier it gets. So yeah, I would say just find commonalities with people, reach out to them and start building those connections, starting with that.
And don't forget to use all your resources. I'm going to keep saying that over and over again. Francis in the career office, joining the NSBE SHIP Suite, Center for Diversity and Engineering, like leveraging all of those resources that are available to you that can help you prioritize and figure out which are going to be most meaningful based on your goals. There are some people who figured it out, so learning from them so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel will be key.
Thank you, Shavonne. I know this is Francis again. I know sort of time is winding down. I'd love to get to this last question. Maybe we can offer a few answers to it. So how do you learn about the culture of a workplace when looking for a job? And how do you know if the place is a good fit? Justin mentioned finding a place where you can be authentic with yourself, where you can be your authentic self. How do you do that?
I guess I'll chime in on that one. One good way to do it is for those that are not graduating yet, externships. We've all heard of internships, of course, the things that happen during the summer, but I did several externships as well, air products and chemicals. I did that during, I think it was my December break. Those externships usually takes place during your winter break. Because of COVID, I don't know how that's going to happen going forward, but I was able to get I did 2 or 3 of them during my sophomore year, I believe in January, visited their campus, talked to some of the folks there, and I spoke to a lot of the employees. That's a really big part. Is it's good to talk to all the senior managers. They're going to want to give you the best of the company, right? That's their job. But I would focus in on the employees, and if you can, do externships, because that way you'll get a good flavor of how the company is. It's one thing to go on the website. You're going to learn a lot of factual information, but when you actually start, going to visit people and employees at roundtables, that's when you'll get a good flavor of the culture of an organization.
And then one question did just come in. Do you think we have time to answer that, or should we wrap up? Maybe we have just quick. question. It seems like everyone had great experiences in those rotational programs. Do you have advice on how to be a strong candidate for those competitive programs? Maybe Les, a few comments on that? Or Shavonne?
I actually think Shavonne may have had to run. Can you ask that one more time?
Sure, I know I said really quickly. It seems like everyone had great experiences in those rotational programs. Do you have advice on how to be a strong candidate for those competitive programs?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing you want to do is work very closely with the Career Services Office, because I was able to find out about Fords through the Career Service Office at UVA, and that's how I applied. So your Career Service Office is going to have a lot of information on that. That's number one. Number two, don't just highlight the technical capabilities of what you do from a GPA perspective, but highlight the extracurricular activities that you do. I know it's really tough at UVA or VCU to do extracurricular things, but things like NSBE, also if you're involved in community service organizations on the campus at VCU in Richmond or at UVA, it shows that you're a well-rounded person. And in rotational programs, they're looking for people who can do above and beyond just the 9 to 5 aspect. They're looking at people who want to be good community servants as well. So I was very active also in Detroit. We're doing a lot of tutoring with inner city kids in Detroit. And that rotation program that I got, they liked the fact that I had done similar things in the city of Charlottesville. So make sure you do quote unquote off resume activities that don't have as much to do with engineering, but more so to do with the community.
Thank you, Les, so much. Also, we had talked about follow-up. If our participants and students want to follow up with our panelists, is it okay? I know, Les, you'd mentioned you really like to have people reach out to you through LinkedIn. And Morgan and Justin.
Absolutely, yeah, LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Is that okay, Morgan and Justin also?
Yeah,
oh, Morgan.
Or email, either is fine for me.
All right, well, I can't thank you enough to all of our panelists, to our facilitators. We'll be following up with our recording for all that attended this webinar. And we're just very grateful and so appreciative for all of your guidance and your advice, and for all that you shared, and also for being so authentic as well. And Nate and Naja, great job on facilitating this webinar. Thank you all so much. You're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say hi, Justin Dean. This is Justin, everybody. Hi, I'm Justin Dean. I'm at BCG. Ha, 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 ha.